Her eyes widened. The audience froze. For the first time in decades of commanding every room she walked into, Oprah Winfrey, queen of television, master of the controlled pause, was caught utterly speechless. The studio air tightened as if no one dared breathe too loudly, afraid of breaking the moment. The camera lingered on her face. That iconic look of poised certainty cracked open by something unexpected, something she hadn't seen coming. And in that silence, every viewer at home leaned forward, wondering the same thing. What just happened? The queen of talk stunned into silence. How did it happen? Rewind. The tape spins backward. Applause in reverse, smiles rewinding into neutral, words swallowing themselves back into mouths. The clash hadn't begun here. It had been building unseen, waiting for the right spark. And the spark came from a woman who knew what it meant to fight her way into the spotlight, not through celebrity, not through fame, but through grit, through courage, through a refusal to bow. Jasmine Crockett, she didn't just answer questions, she defied them. She didn't just respond, she cut through. And in a single exchange, she shifted the balance of power in a room designed for someone else's control. Oprah had asked a question, sharp, pressing, intended to corner. But instead of shrinking, Crockett leaned in, delivering words that pierced the silence and left the legend across from her, blinking, shaken, searching. It wasn't anger that made the moment electric, it was composure. Crockett's calm force carried the weight of generations told to stay quiet, told to defer, told to be grateful for even being allowed on the stage. And here she was standing firm, unapologetic, embodying the pride of those who'd been overlooked for too long. In that instant, a truth surfaced. No matter how powerful, no matter how celebrated, no one is untouchable when confronted by raw honesty. And if Oprah Winfrey could be stunned into silence, then anyone could be. The audience sensed it. Viewers online would soon replay it endlessly. But to fully grasp why this clash became unforgettable, why it sent shockwaves far beyond that studio, back to the first question, the first spark, the first moment when two worlds collided. To understand this jaw-dropping clash, we need to start from the very beginning. Oprah Winfrey is not just an interviewer. She is an institution. For decades, she has reigned as the arbiter of stories, the gatekeeper of narratives, the voice that can coax confession from the guarded and grace from the nervous. When guests sat across from Oprah, they weren't simply speaking to one person, they were speaking to history, to an audience of millions who trusted her to lead the conversation, to control its rhythm, its tempo, its heartbeat. And on this night, the stakes could not have been higher. Cameras rolled, lights burned hot, and the entire nation tuned in with the unspoken expectation that this, like countless episodes before, would be another masterclass in Oprah's dominion. Few ever challenged her. Fewer still ever left her rattled. Across from her sat Jasmine Crockett, a name still rising, still being tested by the fire of scrutiny. For many, she was an upstart, a bold voice unafraid to rattle cages, a woman of color whose presence alone on such a platform carried the weight of representation. Every word she spoke carried double meaning, her own convictions, and the silent expectations of those who saw themselves in her. Oprah's platform was legendary. It had elevated politicians, crowned cultural icons, rewritten careers, but it had also ended them. To step into that arena was to gamble one's legacy against a woman who had time and again shaped the public's perception with a single pointed question. The contrast was stark. Oprah, the titan of media, seated with her calm authority, ready to guide the story where she willed it. Crockett, the challenger, steady yet fiery, determined not to be just another guest swallowed into the endless archive of Oprah's victories. The set itself seemed to lean toward Oprah, built over decades to magnify her presence. Yet on this night, something shifted. The room, instead of bending entirely to her will, bristled with the tension of two powerful energies colliding. The audience felt it in their bones, the clash of eras, of authority versus defiance. Oprah embodied establishment, tradition, a voice that had shaped generations. Crockett embodied disruption, unapologetic truth, telling a new kind of power forged from lived struggle and sharpened by the urgency of now. The intimidation was palpable. Who dares to challenge Oprah? Who dares to meet her gaze, to interrupt her cadence, to seize control of a conversation she has ruled for decades? And yet, Crockett's presence was not of someone intimidated. Her body language was firm, her tone measured, her eyes locked. She had walked into the lion's den fully aware and fully prepared. Narrator voice cut through the rising silence. But this wasn't just an interview. It became a battlefield. Every progressive viewer watching at home understood the symbolism immediately. This was not merely a conversation about politics or policy. This was about power. It was about who gets to define the truth, who holds the microphone, who gets to tell the story of America's future. And when Oprah leaned forward, the first sharp question landing with the precision of a blade, the anticipation cracked open into something electric. The audience shifted, sensing the air change, waiting to see if Crockett would falter or fight. Oh, she didn't flinch. She didn't retreat. Instead, she inhaled slowly, her composure almost defiant in its calm. And once the first tough question landed, sparks began to fly. It began innocently enough. At least that's how Oprah wanted it to appear. Her voice carried that signature softness, the velvet tone that had disarmed countless guests before. But the words beneath were sharp, hard to cut. Do you think your rise has more to do with controversy than actual substance? She asked, the kind of question framed as curiosity, but edged with judgment. The audience let out a soft murmur. It wasn't hostile, not yet, but the implication was clear. Crockett's credibility was under the knife. Most politicians or activists might have smiled nervously, dodged, softened their answer to preserve favor with Oprah's empire. But Crockett leaned forward, meeting the gaze without blinking. With all due respect, she said evenly, if standing up against injustice is controversial, then maybe it's the system that lacks substance. A ripple ran through the studio, half gasp, half applause. Oprah's eyebrows rose, a flicker of surprise crossing her face. She wasn't used to being checked so quickly, so cleanly. But she pressed on, shifting tone, sharpening her delivery. Some say your style is too aggressive, too confrontational, that it alienates more than it inspires. Oh, don't you worry that you're pushing people away. The phrasing was careful, but the message was unmistakable. You're too much. Crockett smiled, small and controlled, as if she had been waiting for this exact jab. Funny, she replied, because every time a woman of color raises her voice, it's called aggressive. But when the powerful shout us down, it's called leadership. I'm not here to comfort power. I'm here to challenge it. This time the crowd erupted. Cheers, claps, a few whistles cutting through the air. The camera caught Oprah shifting in her seat, shoulders stiffening as she recalibrated. She fired back, less velvet now, more steel. Challenging power is one thing, Jasmine. But disrespecting the traditions that built this country, that's another. Where's the line between courage and recklessness? The word reckless hung heavy. It was the kind of accusation that could stick, the kind of branding that could sink reputations. But Crockett didn't flinch. Her voice was steady, her cadence precise. The traditions that built this country, she repeated. You mean the ones that told my ancestors they weren't human? The ones that locked immigrants out while exploiting their labor? If refusing to bow to that history makes me reckless, then I'll wear it proudly. Gasps now. Audible, sharp, undeniable. The cameras zoomed in on faces in the crowd, some stunned, some nodding fiercely. A woman in the third row mouthed, "Wow." Another clapped slowly before catching herself. The tension was thick, alive, crawling across the studio floor. Oprah's eyes narrowed slightly, a rare tell. She wasn't losing control, but she wasn't in full command either. She tried to pivot, to ground herself in authority. She said, voice lower, slower, I've sat across from presidents, kings, icons, and none of them have spoken to me the way you just did. The implication was clear. How dare you? Crockett leaned back in her chair, calm as ever, and let the silence sit for a beat too long. Then, with perfect timing, she answered, maybe that's the problem. Maybe no one's had the courage to. The studio erupted. Applause thundered. Gasps turned into shouts. A man in the audience muttered, "Oh my God," loud enough for the microphones to catch. The camera swung between Oprah's tight smile and Crockett's steady gaze, capturing the electricity that crackled between them. What had begun as subtle shade was now open combat. Oprah, the legendary interviewer, found herself in a duel she hadn't anticipated. Crockett, far from cowed, was rising with each exchange, her confidence building like a storm. The more Oprah pressed, the stronger Crockett's responses became measured, cutting, unapologetic. The whispers in the audience had turned into full-blown buzz. Was Oprah rattled? Was Crockett going too far? The spectacle had become undeniable. A clash not just of two women, but of two worlds, two legacies, two visions of power colliding under the unforgiving glare of live television. And yet, as the tension reached a fever pitch, something remarkable became clear. The crowd wasn't recoiling from Crockett's fire. They were leaning into it. But while the studio braced for Crockett to falter, the opposite happened. The noise of the crowd still echoed when Oprah leaned in again, determined to steady the ground beneath her. She adjusted her note cards with deliberate calm, but the tremor was visible in her hand, small but undeniable. For the first time, her famous composure seemed to slip. She was rattled, fighting to reassert control. The questions sharpened, each one cutting closer, delivered with a touch more force than before. Oprah's tone no longer carried the soft velvet of gentle inquiry. It carried the steel of someone trying to reclaim authority. "Do you realize," she asked, her voice clipped, "how dangerous it is to divide audiences instead of uniting them? Don't you worry that your fire is burning bridges you'll need later?" The audience went still, waiting for Crockett's reply. But Crockett didn't jump in. She didn't rush to fill the silence. She sat back, unflinching, eyes locked on Oprah with a stillness that was almost unnerving. That pause, measured, deliberate, was louder than any words. The camera caught it perfectly, the contrast between Oprah's tightening jaw and Crockett's serene calm, the glint of resolve in her eyes. Where Oprah looked like she was straining to hold the reins, Crockett looked as though she had already seized them without lifting a finger. The longer the silence stretched, the more powerful it became. Audience members began shifting in their seats, some nodding slowly, others whispering. Dramatic tension thickened, as though the room itself leaned closer to hear what would finally be said. And when Crockett did speak, her voice was steady, her cadence slow and deliberate, each word landing like a stone on glass. "Respectfully, I'm not here to preserve comfort. I'm here to pursue truth, and sometimes truth divides before it heals." The statement hung in the air, simple but devastating. Oprah opened her mouth as if to interject, but she didn't. Her eyes flickered, searching for footing. The legend was on the defensive, while the challenger was radiating the unshakable energy of someone who knew exactly who she was. Every time Oprah pressed harder, raising her voice slightly, emphasizing her authority, Crockett responded not with volume, but with stillness. The restraint was powerful. It carried centuries of unspoken resilience, the kind of strength that doesn't need to shout because it refuses to bend. The spotlight seemed to shift, not by design, not by camera cue, but by gravity. Crockett became the axis of the room, every eye fixed on her calm resolve, every breath seemed to synchronize with her measured rhythm. Even the dramatic music cues swelling in the background only magnified her presence. Admiration rippled through the audience. This wasn't just defiance, it was dignity. Crockett wasn't merely sparring with Oprah. She was showing millions watching what it looked like to hold ground when the most powerful person in the room tried to shake it from under you. Oprah tried once more, her tone almost pleading this time. "But if you refuse compromise, if you refuse to bend, how do you expect to lead?" Crockett leaned forward, her eyes steady, her voice unyielding yet quiet enough to draw the room in. Leadership isn't about bending to power. It's about standing firm for people who've been bent too long. The audience gasped, then erupted again, clapping, cheering, rising in pockets across the studio. Oprah looked down briefly, regaining her breath, but the moment had already slipped from her grasp. Crockett had turned silence into dominance, composure into weaponry. And in that silence, in that composure, something shifted permanently. Oprah's aura of invincibility had cracked, and Crockett's calm, resolve filled the space where certainty once sat. All. And then came the breaking point. Oprah Winfrey had spent a lifetime mastering the pause. She knew how to weaponize silence, how to let an audience lean forward in the gap between a question and its answer. But tonight, silence no longer belonged to her. It had been claimed by Jasmine Crockett, who wielded it like a blade, who made the act of waiting feel like defiance. Oprah's eyes narrowed, the faintest strain tugging at her practiced smile. She inhaled, squared her shoulders, and delivered what was meant to be the finishing blow. Her voice dropped lower, sharper, carrying the weight of judgment and finality. "You talk about truth," she said slowly, enunciating each syllable as if chiseling it into stone. "But truth without grace is cruelty. And Jasmine, maybe that's your problem. You don't know how to respect the grace of this platform or the grace of those who came before you. You confuse disruption with progress. And in the end, people won't remember your words. They'll only remember your anger. The words hung like a guillotine, suspended in air." The audience reacted in waves, a sharp intake of breath, then murmurs rippling like a storm rolling over water. Some nodded reflexively. After all, Oprah had spoken with the authority of a woman who built an empire on her ability to define the terms of discourse. But others frowned, shifting in their seats, unsettled by the sting behind the statement. A woman in the front row clasped her hands tighter. A young man in the balcony whispered. That was low. The silence after the remark was heavy, suffocating, as though every person in the studio knew they were on the brink of something irreversible. The camera zoomed in on Crockett's face, catching the flicker of thought in her eyes, the stillness of someone calculating their move. It was the moment everyone expected her to shrink, to bow her head slightly, smile politely, and pivot away. It was Oprah, after all, her show, her arena, her narrative. Who dared to press further? Narrator's voice cut through the tension, low and deliberate. Everyone expected Crockett to retreat, but she was just getting started. Crockett didn't answer immediately. She let the accusation linger, let it breathe. The longer she stayed silent, the more the remark twisted on itself. Oprah shifted in her chair, perhaps expecting compliance, perhaps waiting for an apology. But what she received instead was Crockett's steady gaze, unwavering, unblinking, the kind of look that told the entire room, "You will not define me." Finally, Crockett leaned forward, her voice calm, almost too calm, as though she were speaking directly to the millions watching at home rather than to the woman across from her. "Grace without truth," she said, "is nothing more than polite silence. And silence has never freed a single person. It didn't free my ancestors. It didn't open the doors for immigrants who built this country while being told they didn't belong. And it won't save us now." The room froze. The words sliced through the air with surgical precision. Crockett hadn't raised her voice. She didn't need to. Her calm was more devastating than any shout could have been. The audience erupted in gasps, some covering their mouths, others nodding with wide eyes. A few clapped instinctively, their palms striking before their minds caught up. Oprah blinked, stunned not by the volume but by the weight of the reply. She tried to hold her composure, but the cameras caught it. The faint tightening around her mouth, the flicker of something between surprise and frustration. Crockett continued, her cadence building, her tone still steady, but infused with an undercurrent of fire. "You say, people won't remember my words. They already do. They remember when I stood in the halls of Congress and called out hypocrisy to its face. They remember when I refused to be silenced by those who think power means you never get challenged. And they will remember this moment too, not because of anger, but because of truth spoken in a place where truth usually gets buried under applause." The audience roared now, the sound swelling like a tidal wave, breaking past the studio walls into living rooms across the country. The cameras caught Oprah sitting still, her legendary control slipping further, the balance of power shifting visibly before millions of eyes. The narrator's tone sharpened. The queen of the interview, the woman who had defined conversations for decades, was no longer holding the reins. In the span of a heartbeat, the challenger had turned the tables. Oprah tried to recover. She raised her hand, attempting to quiet the audience, to reassert her dominance. "Jasmine," she said, her tone measured. "Anger may win the moment, but it never wins the future." Crockett didn't flinch. She smiled, a small, knowing curve of her lips that radiated composure. "If fighting for dignity looks like anger to you, maybe you've mistaken comfort for progress. My future doesn't depend on appeasing power. It depends on standing for people who've been voiceless for far too long." Gasps again. Louder this time, followed by thunderous applause. People rose from their seats. Some clapped, some shouted, others simply shook their heads in disbelief. The camera caught Oprah pressing her lips together, nodding faintly, "Oh." But the nod read less like agreement and more like acknowledgement, an unspoken concession that she had been outmaneuvered in her own house. The suspense was unbearable. Viewers at home leaned closer to their screens, phones buzzing as clips began to circulate online within minutes. Social media timelines flooded with comments. Did Crockett just check Oprah on her own stage? History being made in real time. This is the moment everything changed. Inside the studio, the atmosphere was electric. The tension that once weighed heavy had transformed into a storm of energy, buzzing with the recognition that they were witnessing something rare the moment a challenger seized history from the hands of the established. Crockett sat still, her breathing calm, her posture unshaken. She wasn't gloating, she wasn't rattled, she was resolved. And in that stillness, the audience saw it: dignity, power, the unshakable presence of someone who refused to bow. The narrator's voice swelled over the scene, carrying the weight of revelation. What was meant to silence her instead became her loudest victory. In that moment, Oprah Winfrey, the master of conversation, faced the one thing she could not control: truth spoken without fear. The camera zoomed close on Oprah's stunned expression, then shifted to Crockett's calm, unwavering stare. The contrast was cinematic: one shaken, one solid, one searching for footing, the other standing tall without effort. The crowd's roar began to fade into a hush again, anticipation thickening once more. Because deep down, everyone knew the moment wasn't over yet. The battle had only just reached its climax, and with one breath, the power dynamic flipped. The studio was already trembling with the aftershocks of the breaking point, but no one was prepared for what came next. Jasmine Crockett leaned back in her chair, her composure radiating calm power, the kind of calm that doesn't retreat but readies itself. Oprah shifted slightly, her hands folding tighter in her lap, her legendary command of the room slipping like sand through her fingers. Crockett inhaled slowly, eyes scanning the audience, letting the tension marinate. Every second of her silence was deliberate, a masterstroke in control. The cameras drank in the image, Oprah's brow furrowed, her lips pressed thin, and Crockett unshaken, unhurried, as if she were the one who had been running interviews for decades. Then she spoke. "You know what's ironic, Oprah? You built your empire by giving people a voice, by telling stories no one else would touch, by saying to the world every struggle matters. But tonight, you're looking at me, a black woman standing in her truth, and suggesting my voice should be smaller, softer, quieter, so it doesn't make people uncomfortable. Isn't that the very thing you spent your career fighting against?" The words were measured, precise, almost surgical. The audience reacted instantly, gasps, whispers, the shuffling of bodies trying to lean closer. A woman in the back row whispered, "Oh my God," as though she had just witnessed a sacred taboo being broken. Oprah blinked rapidly, caught between the sting of the accusation and the recognition of its undeniable accuracy. Her lips parted as if to reply, but no sound emerged. Crockett continued, her tone steady, her cadence rhythmic, like a preacher at the pulpit. "I don't confuse disruption with progress. I know exactly what disruption is. It's the only thing that's ever made a progress in this country. Women didn't win the vote by staying polite. Civil rights didn't come because people waited their turn. Immigrants didn't carve out futures here by staying invisible. And I won't apologize for standing on their shoulders and refusing to shrink." The audience erupted. Applause breaking out mid-sentence, cheers rising, bodies lifting from seats. The cameras cut to Oprah, who shifted uncomfortably, her jaw tightening as the sound swelled around her. For the first time in her career, the applause wasn't hers. Crockett let the noise simmer before delivering her next blow. She leaned in slightly, her eyes locking on Oprah's with unshakable clarity. "You said people will only remember my anger. No, they'll remember that I didn't bend. They'll remember that when the biggest platform tried to reduce me, I chose to rise. And they'll remember that even here, in this chair, I refused to let anyone rewrite the value of my voice." The crowd gasped again, louder than before, as if struck by lightning twice in the same storm. A chant began, soft at first, then rising. Crockett! 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 Oprah shifted in her seat, visibly rattled. She attempted a smile, but it faltered under the weight of the moment. She looked not like the orchestrator of the conversation, but like someone trying to regain ground that was vanishing beneath her feet. The narrator's voice cut in low and dramatic. It was the kind of moment you replay over and over, because it changes everything. Crockett wasn't finished. She sat upright, her shoulders squared, and with a slight pause to command silence, she spoke directly to the millions watching at home. Every young woman, every immigrant, every person told to sit down and be grateful just for being in the room. Hear me now. You don't have to earn the right to speak with softness to be respected. Your dignity is not measured by your tone. Your power isn't granted by permission. It's yours already. Take it. The audience exploded. Some stood on chairs, clapping and shouting. Others wept openly, overwhelmed by the release of emotion, the validation of words they had waited a lifetime to hear on a stage this grand. The camera zoomed on Oprah, who sat frozen, her silence louder than any rebuttal she could have offered. The queen of talk shows, the woman who had defined American discourse for decades, was outmatched, not by volume, not by spectacle, but by a calm, relentless truth that cut deeper than any question she had ever asked. And Crockett's delivery was flawless. Every pause calculated, every phrase sharp, and every look deliberate. She wasn't flustered. She wasn't performing. She was embodying the very thing she defended: unshakable resolve. The applause rolled on, wave after wave, refusing to die down. The chant of her name grew louder, pulsing like a heartbeat through the studio walls. Even the camera operators seemed to linger on her face longer than protocol allowed, as if they too recognized that this was not just television, it was history unfolding. Crockett lowered her voice, a final stroke, soft but resonant. So, if this moment feels uncomfortable, maybe it should, because real change doesn't come dressed in comfort. It comes dressed in courage. And courage, Oprah, courage is the only language I'll ever speak. The studio went wild. People leapt from their seats, clapping, shouting, crying. The roar was deafening, rattling the very set. Even those who had entered the room, skeptical now, found themselves swept into the current of history being made. Oprah tried once more to compose herself to regain footing. She adjusted her blazer, nodded with a tight smile, and muttered, well, I think the audience has spoken. The line, intended as a reclaiming of authority, landed instead as a concession. The narrator's voice swelled. In a single counterattack, Jasmine Crockett flipped the script. What was meant to humble her became her coronation. And as the echoes of her words shook the studio, the world beyond its walls was about to feel the tremors. The cheers carried on, echoing in waves, as Crockett sat still, calm, collected, and resolute. She didn't need to gloat. She didn't need to smirk. The power of the moment spoke for itself. And though the noise raged, one truth lingered louder than any applause. The mic drop had landed, and nothing would ever be the same. But the shock didn't stay in the studio. It exploded online. The studio lights dimmed, but the fire that had been lit inside those walls refused to die. Within minutes, clips of the exchange were already racing across the internet, fueled by the speed of millions of thumbs hitting share. Twitter's trending tab erupted like a volcano. Fat Oprah Clash and Fat Crockett Unstoppable soared to the top within the hour. TikTok feeds flooded with looped clips of Crockett's mic drop, each replay punctuated by gasps and captions like, "This is history," or "She flipped Oprah in her own house." Memes multiplied faster than anyone could count. One side by side still went viral instantly. Oprah mid-blink, startled, paired with Crockett's serene, unflinching gaze. The caption read, "When the teacher realizes the student did the homework better." Another GIF made rounds of Oprah's stunned silence, overlaid with the words, "When you thought you ended the debate but forgot Jasmine came with receipts." On Instagram, influencers and activists reposted the speech, their captions drenched in praise. "Ties is what leadership looks like," one wrote. Another declared, "Crockett just gave voice to millions of us who were told to stay quiet." By the end of the night, her follower count had ballooned into the hundreds of thousands, each new click of the follow button a digital standing ovation. Late night hosts wasted no time either. One joked, "Oprah Just learned the hard way that you don't invite Jasmine Crockett if you're not ready for the truth serum. Another quipped, forget a mic drop. That was a mic meltdown for Oprah. Studio audiences howled, clips circulated, and Crockett's name became shorthand for fearless confrontation. Cable news networks pounced, dissecting the clash with obsessive detail. On one channel, a commentator argued Oprah had lost control of her own legacy moment. On another, pundits marveled at Crockett's poise. This wasn't just a debate. It was a shift. You could see it in real time. The audience choosing the new voice over the established one. Analysts broke down body language, tone, even the cadence of Crockett's pauses, treating each detail like evidence in a cultural trial. And the verdict, according to the people, was overwhelming. Crockett had won. Celebrities joined the chorus. Kerry Washington tweeted, "Standing ovation. Thank you, Jasmine Crockett, for reminding us why courage matters." Ava DuVernay posted a clip with the words, "Iconic." Bookmark this moment. Even athletes and musicians chimed in. LeBron James tweeting simply, "Mick, drop." Cardi B wrote, "Crockett ate, left no crumbs." A pair IOD. For Oprah, the aftermath was harsher. Comment sections filled with disappointed fans who confessed they had never seen her rattled before and didn't like what it revealed. Others defended her, arguing she was still the legend she always had been. But even in defense, the ground had shifted. The conversation wasn't about Oprah's authority anymore. It was about Crockett's arrival. The narrator's voice cut through the frenzy. It was bigger than a clash of personalities. It was validation. For every voice that had been shushed, for every truth that had been softened to fit the room, this was proof. You don't have to shrink to be heard. The frenzy spread beyond the borders of the United States. Headlines appeared in London, Lagos, Karachi, and Sao Paulo. International outlets framed it as a generational reckoning. Oprah, the global icon, meets America's rising firebrand. Crockett's words were translated, subtitled, remixed into different languages, her message amplified by the universality of its theme, courage in the face of authority, and the online creativity didn't stop. By morning, dance challenges appeared on TikTok set to Crockett's now legendary line, "Grace without truth is nothing more than polite silence." Students in classrooms' lips sensed it. Activists at rallies blasted it through speakers. Even brands, never missing a moment to capitalize, tweeted jokes about grace with truth in their product pitches. Everywhere, people felt the ripple effect. Friends arguing about it over dinner tables, coworkers replaying the clip in break rooms, families watching together on their phones late at night. Crockett's name was no longer just a trending topic. It was the conversation of the week, the spark that reignited debates about truth, power, and dignity. The narrator's tone shifted, quieter, more reflective. This wasn't just about a takedown. It was about a transfer of energy, a rising star who refused to dim, a nation that recognized itself in her defiance, and a cultural moment that crystallized into history. But even as the laughter, memes, and hashtags flooded the airwaves, one question lingered, simmering beneath the surface. What did it all mean? Beyond the gifs, the cheers, the endless scroll of commentary, what truth was waiting to be named? And yet, beyond the memes, one lesson rose above the noise. The storm of reactions, the tidal wave of commentary, the memes, and the trending hashtags, all of it was electrifying. But when the noise began to settle, what remained was something far deeper. Jasmine Crockett's clash with Oprah wasn't frozen in history as a gotcha moment. It became something more enduring, more profound. The narrator's voice steadied, deliberate. This wasn't about embarrassing Oprah. It was about proving that dignity, truth, and courage can stand tall against power. Crockett herself clarified this in the days that followed. When reporters swarmed her outside the Capitol, asking whether she felt vindicated, she shook her head. This wasn't about me versus Oprah. Oprah is a legend, but legends aren't above being challenged. What happened that night was about showing people, especially young women, immigrants, and anyone who's been silenced, that you can face power with dignity and still win. That framing resonated. Overnight, the clip wasn't just entertainment. It was a teaching tool. Teachers played it in classrooms, pastors referenced it in sermons, and activists wove it into speeches. The message cut through: courage is not loudness, courage is not aggression. Courage is refusing to bow when the world tells you to shrink. The audience watching from home, many of whom had lived entire lives under the weight of being told to tone it down or wait your turn, felt something shift. For the single mother working two jobs who was dismissed in board meetings, Crockett's calm rebuttal was validation. For the immigrant father told his accent meant he'd never lead, her steady poise was proof. For the young black girl in a classroom where her brilliance was mistaken for attitude, this was a mirror saying, "You are not wrong to stand tall." The narrator rose with inspiration. It reminded us that history doesn't change because someone politely asks. History changes because someone dares to speak when silence is safer. And the contrast between Oprah, rattled in a rare moment of vulnerability, and Crockett, resolute in her calm, wasn't seen as an attack on Oprah's legacy. Instead, it became a lesson in the cycle of power. One generation paves the way, another generation pushes it further. Crockett wasn't tearing down Oprah's empire, she was building on it, carrying the torch into new terrain where truth demanded a bolder stance. In that light, the clash wasn't tragic. It was necessary. Necessary to remind the world that even the greatest voices can be tested, and that testing is how progress keeps moving forward. By the week's end, commentators weren't just asking who won. They were asking, what does this moment tell us about where we are headed? And the answer was clear: toward a culture less interested in comfort and more invested in courage. The narrator's tone swelled with finality, because dignity is greater than hate, because truth is greater than fear, because courage is greater than any seat of power. Crockett herself distilled it best when she spoke at a community rally shortly after. Standing before a crowd of thousands, she said, "That stage wasn't about me proving I'm tougher than Oprah. It was about showing every person watching that your voice has value, even when someone tries to take it from you." Especially then, the words echoed, becoming a mantra online: your voice has value, especially then. And so the clash, replayed millions of times, was no longer remembered for the awkward silence that followed Oprah's failed put down, but for the enduring lesson Crockett crystallized: that courage isn't about overpowering. It's about standing unbroken. The narrator's voice softened, reflective but uplifting. In the end, the real victory wasn't in the clash itself. It was in the reminder that when truth meets courage, even the strongest walls of power can tremble. And that brings us right back to why this video matters. The screen fades to black and white for a final replay. Oprah's stunned expression, frozen in disbelief. Crockett's calm, unwavering stare, glowing with resolve. Two images side by side, telling a story bigger than words. The narrator's voice settles in, firm and resonant. In that moment, Crockett didn't just win an argument, she left a mark on history. She reminded us that truth spoken with courage can shake even the tallest pillars of power. The clips flash. The audience erupting, the hashtags surging, celebrities tweeting, classrooms replaying the line. Then the narrator's tone shifts from reflective to urgent. But this story isn't finished. Because the real question isn't what Jasmine Crockett did that night. It's what we will do with the lesson she left us. The music swells, cinematic, almost marching. If you believe dignity is greater than hate, if you believe courage is stronger than silence, if you believe in voices that refuse to bow, then this is your movement too. Don't just watch history. Be part of it. The final montage rolls Crockett's words, echoing over scenes of cheering crowds, scrolling tweets, and raised fists. Subscribe, share the story, join us. Because when truth and courage meet, the world changes. And together we are unstoppable. The music crescendos, the screen lingers one last time on Oprah's frozen shock, then fades to black.